Hi, I'm Richard Friedman, and welcome to my video cartoon for June 14th, 2025. Here we have the cartoon. This is my latest cartoon where we have the fantasy of President Donald Trump as Pete Hegseth, the Pete Hegseth float in his parade for later on today around 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time at Washington, D.C. And here is the fantasy of the Pete Hegseth parade float. There it is. And basically the idea here is here is the president up there. Here's the Capitol. Here's another tank ahead of him. Here's the Pete Hegseth tank float. It's the Pete Hegseth tank float. And here's a soldier following behind. Okay, there it is. Okay. And I'm going to read you the introduction right now. There it is here. See the full picture. Okay. Richard Trump fantasy of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth parade float ahead of his big, beautiful military parade later today in honor of the Army's 250th anniversary, which also falls on the president's birthday. That in the wake of Hegseth not being able to assure the American people that he would respect any decision from the Supreme Court and district courts on the constitutionality of deploying Marines to Los Angeles. And this was involving the protests against the immigration policies of the Trump administration. They've been going into schools, in different private places, and rounding up people who did not commit any crime just by their premises. That if they're here illegally, and if they're working, whatever they're doing, if they're serving, whatever the good they're doing doesn't matter, because they're criminals because they're here illegally, and whatever they fled when they came here, is irrelevant. The fact is they're here illegally and they're subject to being rounded up, and that's what they're doing. So basically, that's their position here, and then what happens here? At a congressional hearing, because they sent in the Marines, the a congressional group here is questioning Pete Hegseth about that in terms of the constitutionality of using the Marines, because the Marines are basically part of the armed forces of the United States, designed to protect the country from enemy invasion, and they're saying that this was a foreign policy decision. Well, here's a story here. So, decision from the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of deploying Marines to Los Angeles. So Pete Hegseth was being questioned by a congressman, and I don't know whether it was a congressman or in the Senate, it might have been, but it was by a lawmaker, let's say a Washington, D.C. lawmaker, who was bringing this up, holding them accountable for this decision to bring in the Marines on top of the National Guard and the Florida and the people out in California had a tremendous amount of reinforcements from different areas of California as well. Okay, so we should not have. So Pete responds to whether he would respect a decision that, if it was ruled against him, hypothetically from the Supreme Court or district courts out in California, was that we should not have local judges determining foreign policy or national security policy for the United States. So what they're saying here, it's almost like the immunity decision from the Supreme Court, only he's making it not as a judge, but as a Secretary of Defense, that the United States has a right to call out the Marines in cases of where our national security is a national security threat, and that comes under foreign policy. So if there's a group of people anywhere from Alaska to Florida, anywhere in New York, anywhere all over the country, if they're deemed to be by the federal government, Pete Hegseth, President Trump, a threat to national security, they could send the Marines in all over the place. So the thing here was, the purpose of this meeting, in my opinion, was to make sure that they got a ruling so that this doesn't happen again, that they don't keep open like a Pandora's box, like with the immunity decision, where President Trump now can do almost anything he pleases under the fact that this is his official duties. And so this runs parallel to that kind of thinking, that this is foreign policy. This is foreign policy, that once we make the determination there's a national security risk, it becomes foreign policy, and the court doesn't have the standing to make any decision on this. So it's not that we're going against the courts, it's the courts don't have the standing to make any kind of ruling on this matter. So that's what Pete Hegseth is saying here. So here is, as the song goes with the Marines, is the Marines were trained to fight off an enemy invasion or to go into another area that was a threat to the United States, where was a war, and we're defending against a foreign country attacking us, or we're defending interests, democracy throughout the world, or whatever it was. That's what the Marines were for, and they were trained, and that's what they were trained to do, not to go against people who are living here in America. You see, they weren't trained. Their whole mentality is not designed in that respect. So what I have here is this here fantasy of President Trump, and he, in that fantasy, I'm going to introduce to you again. It was from, the song goes, and the Marine theme song is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. It don't say nothing about from the shores of California, or from Los Angeles to New York, we will fight our country's battles. The song goes from the halls of Montezuma. They don't mention no cities in that song. So here goes the song, and this is part of, I would say to you, President Trump's fantasy in terms of extending this to that aspect. Here it is. Here it is. That's the song, the Marine song. Okay, that was that. So I thought I inject that to say that was the objective of the Marines in that song. They didn't mention Los Angeles, California, or New York. They didn't say anything about those cities in that song. So here it is. Here's going back to this. And there's Pete Hegseth in the fantasy of President Trump's. And here's President Trump's remark as Pete Hegseth goes by in the Pete Hegseth parade float. There comes Pete's float. In 100 years, there will be an even bigger parade in honor of the really great job he is now doing for America. We need a tough cookie like Pete now, more than ever in our great history. And here, you can read that. All right. Thank you for watching my video. God bless you, and I'll see you next time. Take care, folks. Stay well and hang in there. Bye.